Jack Miller had nothing left. His last $70 vanished into a storage unit reeking of mold and failure. He stood there under the dim fluorescent light, breath turning to mist, the concrete biting cold against his boots. A broken veteran in a broken winter, ready to surrender. But Rex, his German shepherd, refused. The dog pressed his nose to the far wall, whining low, scratching again and again at the stained plywood. This wasn't random curiosity. It was deliberate, urgent, a warning or a call. Jack sighed, stepped forward to pull him away, then froze. The water stains weren't stains at all. They were straight, clean lines, forming the edges of something hidden. That wasn't a wall. It was a door. And what waited behind it wasn't trash. It was the truth someone had killed to bury, a secret locked in ice for 25 years. Please support us by subscribing, because every story of loyalty deserves to be heard. The wind over Detroit that night howled like an old memory, cold, metallic, and endless. Snow pressed against the abandoned overpass where Jack Miller, a 38-year-old veteran, sat hunched beneath layers of frayed blankets. He was tall but gaunt, his shoulders broad from a life once disciplined, now slumped beneath the weight of too many silent winters. His beard was rough and uneven, streaked with gray. His brown hair, once cropped short in military order, now curled unkempt around his collar. There was a deep scar running down his left knee, the kind earned not by accident but by shrapnel, and it ached with every shift of the freezing wind. Jack's face, though weathered, still carried a quiet dignity, the kind of look that made strangers hesitate before pitying him. His eyes were calm pools of burnt amber, but behind them lived the constant hum of old noise, the roar of helicopters, the scream of distant shells, the names of men he couldn't forget. Beside him, pressed against his side like a heartbeat, lay Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd. Rex was large, his coat a thick blend of gray and tan that shimmered faintly under the flickering streetlight above. His amber eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unwaveringly gentle when fixed on his master. He had the physique of a soldier's dog, proud, disciplined, yet carrying a stillness that came only from years of shared hardship. Rex was more than a companion. He was Jack's anchor, the only creature who could pull him back when the ghosts of war came clawing through the dark. That morning, Jack's world had narrowed to a simple calculation: $70 left, and no plan beyond surviving another week. Shelters were full, and the few that would take him refused Rex. He would never abandon the dog. Too many men had already left him behind. So when he saw the faded sign reading, "Public Storage Auction, Cash Only," something impulsive flickered in him, a soldier's reflex to take a risk rather than wait for slow defeat. Hours later, under the dull glow of a flickering bulb, Jack stood before Unit 117, his prize, a 10 by 10 box of shadows. The smell hit first, rot, mold, and paper gone soft with age. Inside were collapsed boxes, broken chairs, and a cheap floor lamp missing its shade. He'd spent every cent on garbage. A bitter laugh escaped him, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. He dragged an old stool aside and sat, the metal cold through his jeans, and for a long moment simply stared at nothing. His mind drifted, as it often did, back to Helmand Province 10 years ago. The dust thick as smoke, the metallic scent of gun oil and sand. A convoy ambushed, a comrade lost beneath a flipped Humvee. Jack's hand had slipped on the metal when he tried to pull him free, his knee torn apart by shrapnel, when the second blast came. The army patched his body, but not the silence that followed. When he returned home, his city had moved on without him. His marriage dissolved, his name quietly erased from the ledger of useful men. A low whine broke through the noise in his head. Rex, sitting alert near the back wall of the unit, his ears pricked, tail stiff, eyes locked on something. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, thinking the dog had caught the scent of rats. But Rex didn't move. He pressed his nose against a section of stained plywood, whining again, pawing at the same spot with deliberate force. Jack frowned. The sound was rhythmic, insistent, not the frantic scrabbling of prey chase, but the steady knock of purpose. "Rex, come," he ordered softly. The dog ignored him. Another scratch, another whine. Frustration flared. Exhaustion, hunger, cold. Jack pushed himself up, his bad knee grinding, and stepped toward the dog. "I said that's enough," he began, but then he saw it. The wall, those dark, irregular water stains he'd noticed earlier. They weren't random. They ran perfectly straight, vertical and clean, like the edges of a hidden seam. Jack leaned closer, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. They formed a rectangle. The air that seeped from the gap was faintly cooler, and it carried the dry scent of long-sealed dust. His breath clouded in front of him as realization crept in. "That's not a wall," he whispered. His pulse quickened, each beat a thud against the quiet. The storage light flickered again, throwing Rex's silhouette across the wood like a shadow guarding a secret. Jack's hand trembled, part fear, part instinct. He glanced at his dog, whose eyes gleamed with that uncanny knowing only animals possess. Behind that plywood, something waited. Not gold, not salvation, but a mystery someone once tried to bury. And on that frozen Detroit night, with nothing left but his dog and his scars, Jack Miller felt a faint spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Snow drifted quietly against the cracked concrete walls of the storage lot as the city lights of Detroit flickered like dying embers. Inside Unit 117, Jack Miller knelt before the plywood panel that his dog had uncovered. The air was sharp with dust and old rot, and his breath rose in trembling clouds. He had scavenged a rusted tire iron from a corner, its handle slick with grease and age. His hands, calloused and scarred, trembled slightly, not from cold, but from a quiet, rising urgency he couldn't explain. Rex, his German shepherd, stood beside him, muscles taut, ears pinned forward. The 6-year-old dog had the stillness of a trained sentinel, his gaze fixed on the wooden wall as though he knew what lay beyond it. "All right, boy," Jack murmured, his voice low and hoarse. "Let's see what you found." The first strike split the damp wood with a dull crack. Dust erupted into the air, thick and gray, clinging to his face and beard. Jack coughed, then pressed the iron in deeper, prying until the nails screamed loose from the frame. The panel fell forward with a tired groan, collapsing onto the concrete. Cold, stale air rushed out, an odor like rust and time. Behind the false wall was a narrow hollow, no more than 2 feet deep, its interior lined with darkness and secrecy. Jack froze, flashlight trembling in his grasp. Inside were 3 objects, carefully arranged as if waiting to be found. A small wooden box, dark and polished smooth. A wax-sealed envelope, thick and heavy, and a metal container, black and locked by 3 tarnished combination dials. They sat in silence, undisturbed by decades, guardians of a story buried beneath dust. Jack reached in, his gloved fingers brushing against the smooth grain of the wood. The touch sent a strange chill through him, as though the air itself remembered sorrow. He set each object gently on the floor, his mind working through the surreal logic of it all. Who hides things like this? Why inside a forgotten locker? Rex sat close, his breathing calm but eyes alert, watching every move. Jack studied the objects under his dim light, torn between curiosity and dread. The wooden box opened first. It creaked faintly, revealing a handful of old black and white photographs, curled at the edges. In one, a man stood beside a river, his face sharp, smiling with quiet confidence. Another showed him beside a young girl, maybe 7, her hair in messy pigtails, eyes bright with laughter. The back of the photo bore neat handwriting, David and Emily, 1995. Jack frowned, his fingers lingering over the name. The man's face was intelligent, but tired, the kind of face that knew responsibility too early. There was something achingly human in that smile, an ordinary life caught in still frame. Jack swallowed hard, setting the photos aside. Then came the envelope. The red wax seal was cracked with age but still intact, stamped with a faint emblem of overlapping letters, perhaps a family crest. His thumb hesitated before breaking it. The paper inside was yellowed and fragile, the ink faded to a bruised blue. The handwriting trembled slightly, uneven but deliberate. It began simply. My name is William Turner. If you are reading this, I am already gone. Jack's pulse slowed. The letter continued, the words tightening as though the writer fought his own fear. I am a coward, and this is my confession. 25 years ago, my brother David Turner, an environmental engineer, discovered something terrible. He found that Bishop & Company falsified environmental safety reports at the old Riverside plant, covering up toxic waste leaks into the Detroit River. He was going to expose them. But before he could, there was an explosion, a gas leak, they called it. It killed him instantly. Jack stopped reading. His jaw clenched, and the taste of metal filled his mouth. He had heard of Bishop & Company. Their logo was painted across half the city's new construction. A company that built towers from the same steel mills where men like him had once broken their backs. He looked back at the letter. I knew it wasn't an accident, William's words continued. I saw the evidence. His notes, his files, the photographs. But they came for me. Men in suits, polite, calm, saying it was in my best interest to let it rest. I was terrified. I ran. I took what he had gathered and hid it here, inside this very unit. I paid the rent as long as I could, hoping no one would ever find it, or that someone braver than me would. Jack's hand shook as he turned to the final lines. If you are reading this, please, bring this truth to his daughter, Emily Turner. She deserves to know her father wasn't a careless fool. He was murdered for telling the truth. The last line was scrawled, the ink smeared where the pen must have slipped. I pray to God this doesn't die with me. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the air eerily still. Jack folded the letter slowly, his thoughts a blur of disbelief and grim recognition. The soldier in him, the man trained to see through lies, recognized the shape of corruption immediately. He'd seen it before. Men dying while others signed papers calling it necessary. The ghosts of war never left him. They simply changed uniforms. He lifted the metal box, its cold weight heavy in his hands. The locks were stiff with rust, unyielding. Whatever was inside, William Turner had protected it fiercely. Jack set it down and rubbed his hands together for warmth, staring at the objects that had somehow become his responsibility. He thought of the little girl in the photo, Emily. She would be grown now, a woman in her 30s, living somewhere far from here, never knowing the truth. Rex nudged his leg, sensing the heaviness in the air. Jack rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth through the thick fur. "You found it, boy," he whispered. His voice broke slightly, the words rough, like gravel. "You found something that matters." For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir inside him. Not anger, not despair, but purpose. The kind he thought had died in the desert long ago. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering the snow across the empty lot. Inside, beneath a flickering bulb, a homeless veteran and his loyal dog sat surrounded by ghosts, holding the fragile beginning of a truth buried for 25 years. The snowstorm had swallowed Chicago whole, muffling sirens and footsteps beneath its pale weight. The world outside was a blur of wind and ghostly lights, but inside the public library on Michigan Avenue, warmth hummed faintly from old radiators. Jack Miller sat hunched over a computer screen, his broad shoulders tense beneath a faded army jacket that had long lost its color. The dim reflection in the glass showed a man who looked older than 38, rough stubble lining his jaw, deep creases around eyes that had seen too much war, too much silence. His hands, thick and scarred, moved awkwardly over the keyboard. Typing was never his skill, patience even less so. But tonight he had both, because for the first time in years, he had a reason to care. He searched the name again. Emily Turner. The name blinked back at him from the screen, attached to dozens of news articles and environmental petitions. She was 35, a climate activist known for her fierce opposition to Bishop & Company's new real estate project, an urban renewal development planned over the contaminated grounds of the Riverside plant, the same place where her father had died 25 years ago. In one photo, she stood at a protest, microphone in hand, her breath visible in the cold air. Her face was sharp but kind, high cheekbones, pale skin flushed from the wind, and eyes the same deep gray as the storm above Lake Michigan. Her auburn hair, long and slightly unruly, framed a determined expression that spoke of sleepless nights and stubborn hope. Jack stared at the picture longer than he intended. There was strength there, the kind he remembered from people who had lost something but refused to let it define them. He printed out the article, folded it neatly, and pulled from his coat the aged letter of William Turner and the photo of David and Emily, taken in 1995. The child in the photo, smiling, holding her father's hand, looked impossibly far from the woman he saw now. Jack placed the two images side by side on the table, the past and present separated by years of buried truth. The ache in his chest deepened, but it wasn't pity. It was duty. He knew what it meant to lose faith in systems that promised justice. He had lived it, in deserts where orders came before conscience, where good men were labeled casualties of procedure. This letter, this woman, this secret, they were his mission now, as clear as any he'd ever been given. That night, in the corner of a rundown diner near the library, Jack wrote a letter in careful, deliberate script. He wasn't a man of words, but he wrote plainly, "Ms. Turner, my name is Jack Miller. I came across something that belonged to your father. I believe he was killed for trying to protect others. I have proof. I don't want money. I only want to return what's his. If you wish to know more, meet me at Grant Park tomorrow at sunset. Bring no one else. J.M. He slipped the note into an envelope along with a copy of William Turner's confession and the old photograph, then mailed it the next morning. The following evening, Grant Park was a blur of white and silver, snow swirling through the skeletal trees. The city's skyline flickered dimly through the blizzard, and the lake's edge was hidden beneath layers of ice. Jack stood near the fountain, his breath steady despite the cold. Rex, his German shepherd, sat alert by his side, his thick sable coat dusted in snow. The dog's golden eyes followed every sound, every distant movement. Jack had learned to trust that instinct. In war, Rex's alert meant survival. Minutes stretched thin before a figure appeared through the falling snow. A woman, small against the storm, but walking with purpose. Emily Turner wore a long gray coat that clung to her in the wind, a knitted scarf the color of rust wrapped tightly around her neck. Her hair whipped across her face, strands catching in the gusts, but her gaze remained fixed on him. When she reached the fountain, she stopped several feet away, studying him with cautious disbelief. "You're Jack Miller?" she asked, her voice firm, guarded. Jack nodded once, pulling the worn envelope from his coat and offering it to her. "This was hidden in a storage unit I bought. It's from your uncle, William Turner." Emily hesitated before taking it. Her gloved fingers brushed the edge of the photo inside, and when she saw it, her younger self laughing beside her father, her breath caught. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, eyes glistening. Jack told her everything. How Rex had found the false wall, the boxes, the letter, the evidence of Bishop and Compte's cover-up. His voice stayed steady, though his chest tightened with each word. Emily listened in silence, snow gathering on her coat, her face pale but unreadable. When he finished, she looked down at the letter, tracing her father's name with a trembling hand. "My mother," she murmured, almost to herself. She always said the explosion wasn't an accident. No one believed her. They said she was grieving, paranoid. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, the hard lines of resolve softened into something fragile. Jack looked away, giving her space, but his silence said more than words. He understood loss that lingered too long. After a pause, she folded the papers carefully and looked at him again. "If what you're saying is true, this company, Bishop & Co., they're still building on that same land. They'll cover up everything for good." Jack met her gaze. "Then we stop them." Before she could answer, Rex's low growl cut through the wind. His ears flattened, eyes fixed on the shadows by the tree line. Jack followed his stare and saw it. A pair of headlights flickering through the storm. Too still. Too focused. A black SUV idled half-hidden behind the snowbanks, engine humming faintly. Jack's instincts sharpened instantly. "We're being watched," he said quietly. Emily stiffened. He turned to her, voice firm but calm. "Follow me. Stay close." Together, they moved across the frozen path, their footprints quickly swallowed by falling snow. Rex trotted beside them, muscles coiled like springs. The wind rose behind them, carrying the sound of tires crunching over ice. The SUV's lights moved too. For the first time in years, Jack felt the adrenaline he'd buried under exhaustion. the cold, electric pulse of survival. But this wasn't a battlefield of soldiers. This was something older, dirtier. Truth had enemies everywhere. And tonight, beneath the blizzard's howl, that truth had just woken up. The warehouse crouched on the outskirts of Chicago like a ghost from an industrial past, its roof sagging under the weight of new snow. The wind that swept through the broken windows carried the smell of rust and frozen oil. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence, disturbed only by the faint hum of a single generator, powering a desk lamp that glowed weakly in the dark. Jack Miller led the way in, his boots crunching on old concrete. His breath came out in short white clouds, and his eyes, tired but focused, scanned every shadow. His heavy army jacket was streaked with snow, and his hands, chapped from the cold, rested on the leash of Rex, who moved beside him with the careful alertness of a soldier. The German shepherd's fur bristled, his nose twitching at the scent of old metal and oil. Jack wasn't sure what they were walking into. Since finding the letter and meeting Emily Turner, everything had unfolded faster than his instincts liked. He had spent years in war zones trusting only what he could see. Now he was following a trail of ghosts and secrets. The unease pressed against his chest like the memory of shrapnel. Yet when Emily walked beside him, her auburn hair tangled from the wind, her coat pulled tightly around her small frame, he found himself walking taller. She had a way of holding herself, even in fear, that reminded him of soldiers he once respected, steady, unwilling to give up. From the back of the warehouse, a door creaked open, and a man's voice echoed through the empty space. "You made it." Out stepped Mark Reynolds, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his presence commanding even beneath the dim light. His gray hair was combed back neatly, but his eyes, ice blue, sharp and calculating, betrayed a lifetime of reading lies for a living. The deep lines around his mouth gave him a look of permanent skepticism. He wore a wool coat over a dark turtleneck and gloves that looked too clean for the place. Once he had been FBI, a name whispered with respect and resentment in equal measure. Now, after leaving the Bureau under circumstances no one ever fully explained, he worked as an independent investigator, exposing corporate crimes no one else dared touch. "Mark Reynolds," Emily said softly, recognizing him immediately. Her voice cracked just slightly. He had been her father's friend, the one who used to visit their house when she was a child, always bringing small trinkets from his travels. Seeing him again, aged and haunted, was like meeting a ghost of her own past. Mark gave her a slow nod. "You look just like David," he said. He was stubborn, too. His tone was half fondness, half warning. Jack stepped forward, the metal case in his hands. "This is what we found." Mark's eyes sharpened. He cleared a space on the work table and placed the lamp closer. "You said it was locked?" "Triple combination," Jack replied. The older man smiled faintly. "They never learned to stop, underestimating me." From his pocket, he pulled a slender set of lockpicks, illegal for most, second nature for him. His movements were calm, precise. Within minutes, the first lock clicked open, then the second. The third resisted longer, but finally gave with a soft, metallic sigh. The lid lifted with a hiss of air, releasing the scent of age and secrets. Inside lay folders yellowed by time, each stamped with the seal of Bishop and Company, project budgets, chemical disposal records, and lists of payments to local officials. Beneath them, wrapped in wax paper, was a rolled map, a survey of the old Riverside plant, marked with red circles where toxic waste had been buried. At the bottom rested a small cassette tape, labeled simply Turner Bishop, May 3, 1996. Emily's face went pale as Mark inserted the tape into an old recorder. The machine whirred softly before crackling to life. A man's voice filled the warehouse, deep and tired. David Turner. "You can't keep doing this, Richard. People are getting sick. You promised cleanup. This isn't a mistake anymore, it's murder." Then another voice, smooth, cold, deliberate. Richard Bishop himself. "Watch your words, David. You have a family. Don't make them collateral damage." The tape went silent for a moment, and then came a faint scuffle, a crash, a shout. Then nothing but static. Emily's hand trembled as she covered her mouth. "That's my father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's the night he died." Tears gathered in her eyes, not from weakness but from the unbearable confirmation of something she'd always known. Mark leaned forward, his jaw tight. "This is enough to bury Bishop for good," he said. "But we'll need to move fast. He's got eyes everywhere." As if summoned by the words, Rex suddenly growled, deep and low, the sound vibrating through the air. Jack turned, instincts kicking in just as headlights swept through the warehouse windows. "Get down!" he barked. A split second later, the black SUV from Grant Park screeched to a halt outside. Two armed men in dark coats burst through the side door, guns drawn, their boots slamming against the concrete. Mark killed the light, and the world collapsed into shadow and chaos. Shots echoed, sharp against the metal beams. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously, teeth bared, darting between the attackers and his people. One of the men cursed, tripped over an old crate, and Rex struck, clamping onto his arm just long enough to buy them seconds. "Go!" Jack shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the back exit. Mark snatched the folders and the tape, stuffing them into a messenger bag as he followed. Snow poured in through the open door, glittering under the moonlight. They sprinted across the frozen yard, Rex bounding beside them, his fur streaked with powder. Behind them, shouts and gunfire faded into the storm. They didn't stop until they reached the empty service road where Jack's truck was parked. Hearts pounding, breath clouding in the cold, the three of them climbed in. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of the engine and the wind outside filled the silence. Then Mark broke it. "There's someone who can help," he said, voice steady but grim. "Helen Brooks, civil attorney, tough as nails. She's brought down companies bigger than Bishop's before. And Tom Hayes, an investigative journalist who specializes in environmental corruption. If we get this to them, we have a shot." Emily looked out the frosted window toward the city skyline. Her reflection ghosted over the lights. "Then let's do it," she whispered. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes hard, jaw set. "We finish what your father started." Outside, the wind screamed over the empty highway as the truck disappeared into the white. Somewhere behind them, the men of Bishop and Comey regrouped, their headlights cutting through the dark. The war for truth had begun. Snow was falling again over Chicago, soft and relentless, covering the city in a hush that felt almost sacred. The courthouse on Dearborn Street stood like an ancient monolith against the pale sky, its marble steps crowded with reporters, cameras, and onlookers hungry for the verdict that had taken 25 years to arrive. Inside, beneath the cold glow of fluorescent lights, Jack Miller sat quietly in the back row, his rough hands clasped together, knuckles white. He wore a clean shirt for the first time in months, though the collar still felt foreign against his neck. His hair had grown longer, streaked with gray that the war and the years after had carved into him. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, of ghosts who never stopped whispering. Yet his gaze was steady, anchored by something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. Beside him, Rex rested obediently at his feet, his sable and tan coat gleaming under the courtroom lights, his ears flicking at every sound. The 6-year-old German shepherd sat tall, like he understood the gravity of this day, the way only loyal creatures do. At the front, Emily Turner took the witness stand for the final time. 35, slender but unyielding, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had fought too long to back down now. Her auburn hair was tied back in a simple knot, revealing a face both radiant and worn by grief. The sharp gray of her eyes softened only when they drifted toward Jack and Rex, silent allies who had dragged the truth from beneath the snow. She spoke calmly, her voice steady even as the words shook the room. My father, David Turner, was not a careless engineer. He was a man who believed in responsibility. He died trying to protect people from harm. Bishop and Kompomo took his life to protect their profits, and for 25 years, they buried the truth under concrete and lies. Her testimony was followed by Mark Reynolds, the former FBI agent turned investigator. Age had not dulled him. If anything, the trial had sharpened his presence. He stood tall, his silver hair slicked back, the deep creases around his mouth etched from decades of confronting liars. His voice carried authority as he presented the evidence. William Turner's letter, the bribery ledgers, the maps of buried waste, and finally, the recording between David Turner and Richard Bishop. The courtroom was silent when the tape played. Bishop's voice, calm and arrogant, filled the air. Watch your words, David. You have a family. Then the static, the crash, the silence that followed, the sound of murder without bullets. Emily turned away, her hand trembling. Even the judge, a stoic man named Harold Graham, paused to compose himself before continuing. The prosecution's final blow came with Mark's calm statement. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. They silenced a man for telling the truth. He looked directly at Bishop, who sat at the defense table, older. Now, his once slick hair thinned, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the sweat gathering on his brow. For years, Richard Bishop had been a symbol of untouchable power, a corporate titan whose name built half the skyline. Now he looked small, cornered, his arrogance crumbling beneath the weight of truth. When the verdict came, the room held its breath. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice, the judge said, voice firm and unflinching, we find the defendant, Richard Bishop, guilty on all counts. The words rang through the courtroom like church bells. Cameras flashed. Reporters bolted for the doors. But Jack didn't move. He sat still, eyes fixed on Emily, who bowed her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Outside, the world erupted in noise. Headlines the next morning read, "Secret buried beneath the snow, the truth that took 25 years to rise." The story spread beyond Chicago, beyond Michigan, beyond the Midwest, until the name David Turner became a symbol of integrity reclaimed. The government seized Bishop's remaining assets. Bishop and Company collapsed within weeks. But for Jack and Emily, the victory was something quieter, more personal. Months later, When the last snow melted, Emily stood on the reclaimed grounds of the old riverside plant, the land her father had died for. Now the poison-soaked soil had been cleared, replaced by saplings and fresh foundations. In the heart of it stood the Turner Hope Center, its brick walls still new, sunlight glinting off glass panels. It was more than a building. It was a promise. The center housed affordable homes, a small park, and a specialized unit. A Veterans and Service Dog Rehabilitation Center, where rescued dogs would be trained to aid returning soldiers and people in need. Jack walked slowly through the main hall, the echo of his boots soft against polished floors. He had been hired as head of security, though to him it felt more like a second chance than a job. His limp was still there, his scars still deep, but the burden on his shoulders had lifted. Rex trotted proudly beside him, wearing a small blue bandana embroidered with the words, "Hope lives here." Children from the nearby housing complex ran to pet the dog, laughter spilling through the hallways. For once, Jack didn't flinch at the sound. He stopped near a large mural on the wall, a painting of David Turner, smiling beside a younger Emily. Beneath it the words, "Truth may sleep beneath the snow, but it never dies." Emily joined him quietly, her coat dusted with the season's first snowflakes. "It's strange," she said softly. "Every time it snows, I used to feel like the world was covering him up again. Now it feels like he's watching over us." Jack looked out through the glass wall of the lobby, where the park stretched white and glimmering under the winter sun. "He'd be proud," he said, voice low, sincere. "You brought light to what they tried to bury." Rex sat beside him, ears perked, tail sweeping gently over the floor. Jack reached down, resting his calloused hand on the dog's head. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. He smiled faintly. "We made it home, old boy," he whispered. "We finally made it home." And for the first time in years, Jack Miller felt peace. Not the silence of defeat, but the kind that comes when you've done something that mattered. When the ghosts finally rest. The snow kept falling, but now it no longer felt cold. Sometimes, God doesn't part the seas or send thunder from the sky. Sometimes, His miracles come quietly, on four paws, and with eyes that never stop believing in us. Jack thought he'd lost everything, his home, his faith, his reason to fight. But through Rex, he found what he'd been missing all along, the grace of purpose and the courage to do what's right even when no one is watching. In our own lives, we all face winters, seasons of loss, doubt, and silence. But even in those frozen moments, God is working. Maybe through a loyal friend, maybe through a stranger, or maybe through the quiet voice inside that says, "Don't give up yet." If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly gone. Leave a comment, subscribe, and join us in praying for all the forgotten souls, the veterans, the lost, the broken, that they may find warmth, loyalty, and a light waiting under their snow. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may He always send you a faithful companion when your road grows cold.